But vulnerability is not just about fear and grief and disappointment. It's the birthplace of everything we're hungry for. I've just never done anything that's turned out to be valuable that wasn't just scared shitless to do it. Like everything I've ever done that's ever really made a contribution, I have felt alone in doing it and afraid. When I walk on the stage, I'm gonna talk about things that 90% of the people in the audience have never thought about, talked about, and are scared to listen to.
Wanna soar? Get a mentor. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Brené Brown, and 5 pieces of her best life-changing advice. Mentor me, Brené. All right, let's kick it off with rule number 1, embrace vulnerability.
We think about vulnerability as a dark emotion. You know, there are a lot of people who talk about positive emotions, negative emotions, dark emotions, light emotions. We think of vulnerability as a dark emotion. We think of it as the core of fear and shame and grief and disappointment, uncertainty, things that we do not want to feel, right? Things that I don't want to be vulnerable because that means I'm afraid. That means I'm uncertain. That means I'm at risk. I'm exposed. I'm in grief. So what we do is we armor up and we say, I do not want to slip into these dark emotions. I will not let myself be vulnerable. But here's what I learned from the research and certainly put into motion in my own life that was the most life-changing, is that vulnerability is the center of difficult emotion. But it's also the birthplace of every positive emotion that we need in our lives. Love, belonging, joy, empathy. How many of you would agree that we're in a serious empathy deficit in our culture today? Totally, right? No vulnerability, no empathy. In a culture where people are afraid to be vulnerable, you can't have empathy. You know, empathy is not a default response. If you share something with me that's difficult, in order for me to be truly empathic, I have to step into what you're feeling. And that's vulnerable. So there can be no empathy without vulnerability. Why do you think, in that example that I used a while ago, daughter comes home and says, tears, no one sat with me at lunch today. They made fun of what I was wearing. So-and-so won't talk to me. They poured my books out of my locker. And the response back is, I told you, I bought you all those cute jeans. Why aren't you wearing those jeans? And pull your hair back. Is that an empathic response? No, it's a shaming response. Could that shaming response be could a mother who absolutely adores her child respond with that shaming response? Please say yes, don't kid yourself. I mean, come on. If you're a parent sitting in here, then you sure as hell know the answer to that is yes. But why? Why did that happen? Where was the access to vulnerability? Where was empathy? You can't access empathy if you're not willing to be vulnerable. So if my daughter comes home and tells that to me, guess what I have to do? I have to reactivate that sweaty palmed 7th grader who lives inside me. And I have to go, oh God, that's so hard. I'm so sorry. That's happened to me. That's happened to me when I was in middle school, and it's happened to me last week. Let's talk about it. But you can't get there without vulnerability. You can't fake empathy. Innovation and creativity, born of vulnerability. This is my favorite part. I talked about this I did another TED Talk this year in Long Beach. And I told the story that during 2011 and even this year, after the big TEDx Houston talk went viral, the big calls came from Fortune 500 companies. Oh my God, we loved your TED Talk. It was great. Please come talk to all of our senior leaders. And it's like, okay, what do you want to talk about? Like, we don't care. Just come and talk to us. Just, if you could ixnay the shame and vulnerability talk. Every single conversation, barring maybe 10%. I was like, well, what do you mean? Well, we love, you're funny. You have this great research. I think there's a real fit with what we do. We don't really do, that kind of stuff around here. So if you could not mention vulnerability and shame. So just for fun, for grins, I would say, okay, so what would you like me to talk about? Yeah, fourth quarter earnings, frickin' don't even balance my checkbook. I'm not gonna talk about that. So what do you want me to talk about? Well, the big issue, creativity and innovation. And change, we're going through a lot of change. Okay, so vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, innovation, and change. And the reason that crisis is happening is because you're not talking about vulnerability. Imagine creativity and innovation without vulnerability. I'm asking you for a work product that has never been made before, that's completely innovative. I need you to be creative, and I need you to present it to a group of people who half of them are gonna think it's stupid and not understand it. No vulnerability there.
Rule number 2, be authentic.
When I do a lot of leadership work, I talk about understanding your personal values, and my 2 personal values are faith and courage. And so they say, don't talk about faith. It's inappropriate. This is a corporation. And then I do a lot of work in churches, and they'll say, don't cuss. And so I just got to the point where I'm like, look, I've sat across from thousands and thousands of people over the last 2 decades of my life, listening to the hardest things you can imagine. And the 2 things that everyone has in common when they're talking about those things are cussing and praying. If you don't want me to cuss and you don't want me to pray, that's awesome. Ask somebody else. Because what I'm not going to do is get up and bullshit you. And there are a million people in this space who are better than I am, who know different things than I do. Invite them.
Right.
If you need me to wear a suit, I totally get it. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to wear jeans and boots, and probably I'll wear a nice shirt.
Yep.
But I'm not going to do that, because I don't get up there when I speak in public. I don't get up there to talk to talk from my Brooks Brothers self to your Brooks Brothers self. I get up there, and when I walk on the stage, I'm going to talk about things that 90% of the people in the audience have never thought about, talked about, and are scared to listen to. And they need to see me as a person, and I'm just that person. I think if you invite me, I want your event or your leadership team, I want it to be successful.
Yes.
And if you need me to be someone different than who I am, it's not going to be successful.
Also, if you want to have more confidence, check out my 254 series. They're free. The links are in the description below.
I call perfectionism the 20-ton shield. We carry it around thinking it's going to protect us from being hurt.
Yeah.
But it protects us from being seen. We think of vulnerability as a dark emotion. We think of it as the core of fear and shame and grief and disappointment, uncertainty, things that we do not want to feel, right?
You know how blame is described in the research? A way to discharge pain and discomfort.
Rule number 3, risk failure.
I think there's like a thin film of terror wrapped around us. And so if it's not, I'm not safe enough, or I'm not secure enough, I'm not liked enough, I'm not promoted enough, I'm not loved enough.
I don't have enough.
I don't have enough.
I am not enough.
At the very bottom,
Yeah.
I'm not enough.
Yeah. Whoa, that's big. Big, 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 big. Somebody ring some bells. We need some bells to ring on this show. But that's good.
That's it. And so guess what the number one casualty is of a scarcity culture?
What?
Vulnerability.
We shut down.
We shut down.
Because I'm not going to let you know.
No, because I'm already scared.
I'm not
right.
all together.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing is that people are like, oh, well, we lose a little vulnerability. But vulnerability is not just about fear and grief and disappointment. It's the birthplace of everything we're hungry for.
Creativity.
Joy, creativity, faith,
Yeah.
love.
Innovation and
Yeah.
all of that, yes.
And the whole thing is there is no innovation and creativity without failure. Period.
So you got to be open enough to take the risk to fail.
Yeah.
Rule number 4, brave the wilderness.
I've just never done anything that's turned out to be valuable that wasn't just scared shitless to do it. Like everything I've ever done that's ever really made a contribution, I have felt alone in doing it and afraid. But alive.
Yeah. That's a really interesting. Go on, tell me more about that. Alive. Alone but alive. That's sort of like the wilderness.
It is the wilderness.
Because the metaphor for the book is, let's see if I get this right.
Yeah.
Rather than asking you, I'm going to try and
Yeah,
you check
do
my
it.
work. There's a poetic narrative about it being wild and risky, and you have to prepare to go there, and it's also stunning. And so there's an obvious, really clear connection between that and putting yourself out there. Yeah. There's risks and rewards and beauty, but there's an interesting twist, if I get this right, that it's not that you are in the wilderness, it's that you are the wilderness. Explain that, if you would.
Well, I think what I have found is that after the first time, and it only really takes one time, that after the first time that you opt to brave the wilderness, you pull away from what a group of people thinks. Maybe it's your creative community, it's your critics. The first time you pull away and find power in standing on your own, I think your heart is marked by the wild. I think you belong into the wilderness in a different way. Because every time after that, when you choose fitting in over belonging to yourself, it's painful.
And rule number 5, the last one before a very special bonus clip, is show up.
My story is that I am a researcher, and I never thought I would have a big public career. And so I did a TED Talk that went very viral. And in the wake of that, I was kind of everywhere for a couple of months, on every CNN.com, NPR. It was everywhere, and something I wasn't used to. And the marching orders from my therapist and my husband were, do not read the comments online. So I read all the comments online. And so one morning, I woke up and there were 2 or 3 new articles out, and I started reading the comments. And they were devastating. They weren't about my work, they were about me. They were super personal. And they were the things that creative people play in their mind and then give up doing what they really want to do. Like if I asked every single one of you, what would you try if you knew people would never say this about you? What would this be? Those were the comments that morning. Of course she embraces imperfection. What choice does she have? Look how she looks. I feel sorry for her kids. Less research, more Botox. Just mean personal attacks, the things that really, up until that moment, had inspired me to stay very small in my life and my career, just so I could avoid those things. So that morning, Steve and the kids leave. I stay home. I get on the couch, and I watch 8 hours of Downton Abbey. And when it's over, I don't want to turn off Downton Abbey. Because the minute you turn off Downton Abbey, then it's like soccer practice and dinner and back to the mean people. And maybe, should I get Botox? And maybe if I stand still when I talk. So I get out my laptop and I do a search for who was president in the United States during the Downton Abbey era. Have you ever done that? Like you're numbing with TV or a movie, and so when it's over, you just like stay in that space by like learning more about the actors and what's going on. I've been doing this long enough to know that this is like, you're laughing with me, not at me. So I put it in, and Theodore Roosevelt comes up, and a quote comes up. And I read it, and this is what it says. It's a quote from a speech that he gave in the early 1900s at the Sorbonne, and a lot of people call it the Man in the Arena speech. And this is the passage that changes my life. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done it better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with blood and sweat and dust, who, at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who, at worst, if he fails daring greatly. So the moment that I read that, I closed my laptop, and this is what shifted in me. 3 huge things. First, I've spent the last 12 years studying vulnerability, and that quote was everything I know about vulnerability. It is not about winning. It's not about losing. It's about showing up and being seen. The second thing, this is who I want to be. I want to create. I want to make things that didn't exist before I touched them. I want to show up and be seen in my work and in my life. And if you're going to show up and be seen, there is only one guarantee, and that is you will get your ass kicked. That is the guarantee. That's the only certainty you have. If you're going to go in the arena and spend any time in there whatsoever, especially if you've committed to creating in your life, you will get your ass kicked. So you have to decide at that moment, I think for all of us, if courage is a value that we hold, this is a consequence. You can't avoid it. The third thing, which really set me free, and I think Steve, my husband, would argue has made me somewhat dangerous, is kind of a new philosophy about criticism, which is this. If you're not in the arena also getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. Period. That's it.
Now, I've got a special bonus clip from Brene on how to not be a perfectionist that I think you're going to enjoy. But before that, it's time for the 3-point landing questions. Let's go from just watching a video to taking action. Here we go. Question number 1, where do you need to embrace vulnerability? Number 2, what failure do you need to risk today? And question number 3, how can you show up for yourself and your family this week?
How many of you struggle with perfectionism a little bit? Okay, so my favorite story is that someone sent me an email one time that said, hey, I know you have a book on shame, not so interested in that, but if you ever write on perfectionism, I can't wait. So here's the secret. When perfectionism is driving, shame is always riding shotgun, and fear is the annoying backseat driver.
Say it again.
When perfectionism is driving, shame is always riding shotgun. We struggle with perfectionism in areas where we feel most vulnerable to shame. Does that make sense? So we're all comfortable saying, yeah, I'm a little perfectionistic, which is code for like I do things really well. But I'm not comfortable saying I have shame. But perfectionism, what is that? I call it the 20-ton shield. Here's what perfectionism really is. It's a way of thinking that says this: if I look perfect, live perfect, work perfect, I can avoid or minimize criticism, blame, and ridicule.
Whoa, that's good.
All perfectionism is the 20-ton shield that we carry around hoping that it'll keep us from being hurt. When in truth, what it does is it keeps us from being seen. And so we had a great talk about what's the difference between perfectionism.
Yes, because somebody on my staff had the nerve to tell me that I was a perfectionist. And I absolutely denied that. And you stood by me. Thank you very much. Because I'm not a perfectionist. I'm a person who strives for excellence and requires excellence. There is a difference, is there not?
There is a difference. Here's the difference. Because sometimes I'm a healthy striver.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm a perfectionist. It depends on if I've got a worthiness crunch going on. So healthy striving is internally focused. It's I want to do this and be the best I can be. Perfectionism is not about what I want. Perfectionism is exactly what will people think.
If you want to learn the power of vulnerability and emotions with Brene Brown, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll enjoy it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
To me, these are the most profoundly dangerous questions that we center our lives around.